My name is Kay Ness. I'm a neurodevelopmentalist, and first I'd like to thank Chalcedon Presbyterian Church for letting me hold these seminars here and this session, and the support of our pastor, Joe Moorcraft, who's been wonderfully supportive through everything, and the wonderful and talented Deacon Aubrey Bowles, who's making tapes available for us. This is the fifth in our series of seminars on parent training seminars, and we have videotapes available of each of the things that Aubrey has for sale. So one of the main purposes is to make a series of tapes available for people that are interested in different topics. Tonight the seminar is on Down syndrome, and this is a very near and dear subject to my heart. The main reason it is I really want to change the hearts and minds of people about Down syndrome, because over 90% of the children identified with Down syndrome are aborted. They never even get to breathe air. And most of the research going on today is looking at how they can identify them earlier and earlier in utero as having Down syndrome, so they can abort them before they're ever born. And I pray God uses this talk and whatever strength or wisdom we have to help end that horror. I want to dedicate this particular seminar to Amanda, who was the first child I ever worked with Down syndrome, and Amanda graduated from high school with her peers in a private Christian high school in Florida about 5 years ago, and is working with elderly people today in elderly care. There's lots of areas we can cover and lots of places we can start. First of all, you know that Down syndrome is a genetic condition, and it can be one of three types. It can be trisomy 21, in which all the cells have a trisomy or triplication of the 21st chromosome. It can be mosaic, in which only part of the chromosomes are triplicated, and it can be a translocational Down syndrome. But by far most of the children with Down syndrome are the trisomy 21 children. Often children, a large number of children have health issues when they're born. And I don't know, did y'all's children have any health issues? Heart issues, Hirschsprung, digestive issues. If you get past all those things, what we do with children with Down syndrome is treat them just like any other child. We treat them as if we expect them to learn, and they do, and we expect them to advance, and they do. So what we want to look at tonight is what are the particular issues in Down syndrome that we can evaluate and look at and help them advance. Because if you look at your handouts, the very first one is by Miriam Koch, who's a friend of mine, has 9 children. Her middle daughter, Mary, has Down syndrome. And, you know, a lot of what we expect to see in Down syndrome is what are our expectations. Is that if you have a child and the doctor walked in and said he had Einstein syndrome and he was going to be a genius, you provide lots of opportunity and lots of stimulation for this child. When you have a child with the diagnosis of Down syndrome, everybody speaks in hushed tones, they don't want to talk to you, you go through a period of, mental retardation immediately comes to mind, delays and so forth. So you don't provide the stimulation opportunities for the children, and there's very low expectations. Our expectations are very high for children with Down syndrome. And just like any other population, they vary in abilities and level of function. For a child, most of our children with Down syndrome learn to read pretty well. But again, that's variable. They do learn to read, but how well and the level of function depends on lots of things and lots of opportunities and how well we can keep them along the way. So Miriam has a wonderful little introduction to her handouts here. She has a website called EinsteinSyndrome.com. I highly recommend you go to that website and that you join Miriam's listserv. Are you web active?
I'm on Einstein.
Are you on Einstein?
There's a lot that comes through.
On Einstein? Okay. Yeah, Miriam is a dear friend and known her a number of years. I should tell you something about what I do first. As a neurodevelopmentalist, we are privately trained by apprenticeship programs, by organizations across, well, there's a few organizations, there are really not very many, based on the work starting back in the 40s with Dr. Temple Fay, who looked at what kind of stimulation opportunities could we use to help brain-injured children function better. And Dr. Fay, he was a very famous neurosurgeon, developed a lot of things and found out, indeed, if you stimulate individuals with brain injuries, you could help them achieve function and bypass areas of injury of the brain. And a couple of bright little acolytes came along, Glenn Doman and Carl Delicato and a bunch of other, Ed Lewin, and then a bunch of other people came along and put together what they call the Institutes for the Achievement of Human Potential in Philadelphia. So I've also studied there. And Raimundo Veras, who came from, is it Brazil? I think he's from Brazil, had a son with a spinal injury and came to the institutes in the 60s and studied and started the institutes in South America. And so he was working with brain injured children down there, and one of the staff people had a child with Down syndrome, and they came to him and said, will you give us a program for our child? And he says, no, you can't do that because children with Down syndrome have defective brains or something like that. So, no, they kept coming at him. So finally he gave him a program. They went away, did it, and they came back for another program and says, we've done that, he's made great progress, let's have the next program. And the guy went like this. So this was the first realization that, with stimulation programs, we can accelerate the learning of children with Down syndrome, just like any other children. So what I do is I look at all the sensory inputs to the brain, tactility, visual, auditory inputs in a developmental fashion. And then I evaluate the main outputs, the fine and gross motor, speech and language outputs, and then processing and academic performance. And so by looking at all these areas in a developmental fashion, I can look at where the child is, what stimulation they need to get to the next step. And all of this model is based originally on the work of Dr. Temple Fay and the different spin-off groups that you talked about. All of them have grown out of this. There are a few different groups around the country, but not very many people. Okay, so Raimundo Veras' book is a great inspiration. This is still available from the Institutes, IAHP.org, I think it is. Institutes for the Achievement of Human Potential.org. You can still get Raimundo Veras' book that talks about those issues. So when I design, I work with children from severely brain injured to gifted, from newborns to elderly people, and I design programs to help them achieve higher levels of function. So any child, I don't care what the issue is, and I don't care, where it comes from. What we want to do is, as long as the child is medically stable, even if it's a brain injury, what stimulation opportunities can we do to move that child along, and how can we accelerate their development? And because of the way that God has designed the brain, neuroplasticity, meaning the brain is very plastic. If we stimulate it, we can help it grow. If we put them in a dark closet, the brain will degenerate. So plasticity of the central nervous system, the brain, the fact that you will develop higher levels of function with specific stimulation is not a question. It's actually an accepted fact in research. Therapeutically, it's not very well applied. So, so what we need to, but the neurodevelopmentalists have been doing this since the 40s. And the rest of the world, anything that involves, quote, stimulation programs has all grown out of this model and that work. So it's a real privilege to have this, and we need to spread the word and let people know there is a great deal of hope. You can, if something's wrong, you need to look at what's causing that thing to be wrong. what kind of things we need to do to improve that function so they can reach the next level of function. Right? Does that make sense? We'll wait till the end and we'll do the questions. Write your questions down so we can get through the whole thing. So anyway, the interesting thing about Down syndrome is that the children are usually born with normal brains, normal function, except maybe a little low tone and things like that, unless there are major health issues like heart problems. So most of the problems with Down syndrome are developmental. That the children start out normally and slower and slower and slower, get slower and slower in their progress. Back in the 60s and 70s, there was this real clever fellow, Dr. Henry Jekyll. Are you familiar with his work at all? That was trained back in the days before antibiotics. And he was the type of doctor that was trained to evaluate metabolism. And then it just blows my mind, doctors used to be trained that way. And then to learn how to compensate for metabolic problems that the individual was having. So he looked at an individual with Down syndrome and other genetic disorders just like anybody else with a metabolic problem, which is mainly what Down syndrome is. The extra chromosome is cranking out errors in metabolism which accumulate and gradually slows down progress. So Dr. Henry Jekyll was a genius in his own time. He developed what he called the U series, which is some vitamins, minerals, antihistamines, and so forth, to get extra nutrients so the kids would grow better, they'd be healthier, they wouldn't have the edema that they had. And we had the privilege of working with him before he died in the late 70s and seeing the results of some of his work. And even individuals in their 20s, if they were on Jekyll programs, some of them would grow like 6 inches. So his work was really fabulous, and no one was really reproduced everything that he had done. But so the medical treatment of Down syndrome and other genetic conditions, other genetic diseases is an excellent book. It's out of print, of course. It's hard to find. I'm always looking for used books. And so if you can get your hands on a copy of it, it's well worth it, but it's really hard to find. So Jekyll's work was carried on by several other people, and so just using nutrition to counterbalance some of the effects of the genetic problems has been wonderful at helping the kids be healthier, help them grow better, help them be more slender, and help them not have all those respiratory and breathing issues that you have. In the back of your handout, everybody get their, it's 56 pages, your handout, so I got a little carried away. I said, oh, this is cool. In the back of your handout, there's several pages on targeted nutritional intervention. And you can go to Nutrivene.com. Okay, there's an article here on why it's good for children, vitamin mineral supplementation. It's helpful for children with Down syndrome. It's considered controversial in mainstream Down syndrome circles, the National Down Syndrome Association.